Hey everybody, welcome back to NikkiT.live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Drew Powers again. Drew, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Just just got a coffee refills, so pretty good. And I've got a window open where the YouTube is making noise, so I'm just gonna turn that off. Um, I tell my guests to make sure things are muted, and of course I don't mute it. That's my bad. Cool. Yeah, no, I'm doing good. Have a bit of coffee. Been pretty busy with work, but like good busy and over at Open Sauce. But what about yourself? How you been?
Yeah, been doing good. I joined Figma this year, which is super exciting. So I've been busy working on Figma's design system, and I
That's
think we'll
awesome.
talk a little bit about like design systems, open source, some of the cool stuff that's come out in the last year regarding that. But yeah, um,
Cool.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, should we do introductions for the people that
Yeah.
don't know who I am? Okay,
Yeah. For folks. Yeah. Sorry. I think I didn't have enough coffee yet today. Yeah. So for folks who might not know who you are, I guess a bit of background would be helpful for folks, and I'll drop some links where people can give you a follow.
cool. Yeah, so my name is Drew Powers. I'm a mostly front end developer. I've been involved in and out of open source projects over the years. Like I was one of the core contributors to Snowpack. Um, Skypack wasn't really open source, but worked on Skypack, which then led to Astro. I was one of the co-creators of Astro. Um, and I've worked on some other open source projects. Like I manage OpenAPI TypeScript, TypeScript code generation library for OpenAPI schemas, and also work on Terrazzo, which is design token tooling, which is also open
Okay.
source.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm gonna drop a link to that. We did a stream a little while back. I think it was maybe earlier this year. It wasn't last year, I don't think. But yeah, we were hanging out with my old coworker Caleb Delomo from uh, sorry, Duprijean. Sorry, I'm mixing him up with another friend um, from Netlify, and we were kind of looking at Cobalt, which is now called Terrazzo, like you said, and we were comparing it with. I'm trying to remember what we were comparing it to.
Style Dictionary, which
Oh
is
yeah, Style Dictionary. Yeah.
yeah the de facto way more popular design token tooling, which has been around for much longer, which is great.
Yeah. So I guess to touch on that, because you're over at Figma now, and they came across Terrazzo and thought it was super interesting. I guess kind of to touch on like what we discussed last time in the when we were comparing Style Dictionary versus uh, Cobalt now Terrazzo. Like, is there enough movement where people are actually going straight to Terrazzo now? Like, is because I remember when we talked last time, I think you were still experimenting with it, and you were definitely talking about the merits of Style Dictionary, but uh, Terrazzo definitely had its selling points as well, and I guess the project's probably matured a lot more since we last spoke.
Yeah, I mean the kind of the biggest reason to use Terrazzo or not to is the design token specification. So there's the W3C community group, which is codifying design tokens,
Okay,
and the specification is not stable yet. So that's been holding some people back from going all in on it.
okay,
And that's, in a nutshell, why you want to use Style Dictionary is Style Dictionary kind of gives you the tools to like create your own design token language,
okay,
whatever that may be. And that can either be like incredibly powerful or it can just be way too much burn and maintenance, leaving it up to you
okay,
to figure out like how do we think about design. It kind of gets into a philosophical debate internally of like what is a design token, what isn't a design token, if it
yeah,
lets us do anything, where are the boundaries. So some of those questions that kind of kept recurring internally in companies led to the design token specification, where it kind of felt like everyone was kind of reinventing the wheel over and over and over again.
Okay, yeah.
Like, hey, maybe we could like actually just save some time by just having more standard boundaries of like, like more of like a language or a specification of like, here's how to talk about design tokens. Here's how we can just share knowledge
Yeah.
and not recreate the wheel every time. But as you know, it's an open volunteer based standards body. So those things always move slower than people want them to. But
Yeah.
the idea is to like move slowly, get a bunch of input, a bunch of feedback, make sure that you're doing the right thing. Um,
Mm.
so that's been an effort that's been going on for 3 years. We had like a loose goal to try and release the first stable version of the design token specification this year.
Okay.
Um, so that's still ongoing. So
Okay,
if you want to use the um, fuzzy, if you want to use the token specification, Terrazzo is a good way to do it. Style Dictionary just released a version that added support. I have not tried.
okay,
So Style Dictionary just announced design token specification support. But yeah, I've
okay,
not I've not tried it yet, so I can't speak to like what the implementation's like or how it differs.
okay,
But
cool. Um, yeah, I dropped a link to Terrazzo here. I'm like 99.99% certain this is the actual website because it says Figma on it too.
yeah,
Um, Side note, I'm not a great design. I do a lot of front end and I'm able to bring designs to life, but I still miss that little piece that makes a design pop. Like I don't know. I'm that person that's like choosing for 2 weeks which font to put on my blog kind of. But if I've got some good concepts like spacing and stuff, but like actual how things like look like I love the look of this site, but I can't tell you why.
yeah. It's kind of funny how like when you get into like design systems, um, there are there are some ways in which even like at Figma, like design systems are tough to integrate.
Mhm.
Like I think on the surface, I think everyone's like design systems, cool. Like sign me up. That sounds like it solves a problem. But when
Yeah,
you put it into practice, you start to realize the downsides of a design system, right? Like, oh man, I need to do a special thing here. It's just like I use the existing
yeah,
component, it just looks weird. I just like tweak it just a little bit? And it's like, no. Well, it doesn't fit in here. And I want it to, so like
yeah,
the more you commit to a design system, it's this hard thing where like you realize design is like vibe based, like you said, like
yeah,
it looks good, I don't know why. Like the deeper you kind of go into that hole, you kind of come back around to just like, I don't know why, it just looks good.
yeah.
um but
Like
even like the Romans figured this out, or like the ancient Greeks and like the ancient Greek, like
yeah,
aesthetics, the ideal aesthetics. Like if you look at like the Parthenon, there's not very few right angles on the Parthenon at all.
yeah,
Like the columns like ever so slightly taper, and things are just kind of like a little bit leaning inward because they didn't want it to seem like it was falling back on you.
yeah,
So it kind
totally.
of comes back around to, like, the human eye is really weird, the human brain is really weird, and to cater to
Yeah.
it, you kind of have to do these like idiosyncrasies that are kind of really hard to systematize, if that makes sense.
No, totally. And getting back to like fooling like the human eye, like I've been given designs and Iza who I work with, she's awesome. She's our product designer. But there was like I was building some open graph images for some of the stuff at open source, and I literally did it exactly like the design, because in that kind of context you can kind of be pixel perfect because it's like it's not a responsive thing, but visually like there was some text centered on something, but when you like it was correct, like I literally measured it, but when I looked at it I'm like something's off, and I just kind of eyeballed it. I said I'm going to move it up 2 pixels or something, and then even though it's technically not correct, it like to the
Hmm.
eye I was like okay, now it looks good. And it's stuff like that, and like not exactly the same thing, but like a lot of stuff is smoke and mirrors too, because like I've had
Oh
like
yeah.
renovations in my house, and I remember when they did the kitchen, like no house, like even a brand new house, nothing is perfectly square, and they're just shimming stuff, and they're just and even though you look at it, you're like, okay, that looks straight, but like probably if you were to measure things and check angles, it wouldn't be. But again, it's a visual thing, and I always find that stuff just kind of fascinating because it's like you could be like, I did it by the book, but it looks terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you can kind of get more scientific to it. Like a really common one is like, have you ever like centered a triangle? You know, or like
Yeah,
a lot of programs. You probably know what I'm talking about. Like in a lot of programs, or like even in CSS, if you have a triangle shape, what really
yeah,
happens is you have like that square, but if you center the square, it's not centered. You know,
yeah.
so you have to like actually to center the triangle, you have to do more complicated to kind of like move the point up,
Mhm.
or it's like in typography, whenever you have round letters, you have like the baseline and the cap height, where square
Yeah,
letters meet the edges, but then round letters, you look at the O. The O goes a little bit underneath, where like an E has like a flat bottom,
yeah,
the O goes a little bit underneath and a little bit over, just because
yeah,
your eye kind of like cuts the corners off, and it seems like the O is smaller when you line it up. And there's a
yeah,
hundred little things like that that like add up, where if you're just like quote unquote lining it up, it's like
yeah.
it looks wrong. Like things just kind of look out of place.
Oh no, totally. I remember this is before like I realized line height was a thing, but like I was like looking at something trying to make the literal space the same as the design, and then I don't know, this was like earlier on, but like in my career, but I'm like, why is it look terrible? And it was exactly that, like the G's little curve at the bottom, or like a Y and stuff, and then like once I understood line height, and I think also a lot has changed because like in if we go back to like the 2000s where you're like using Macromedia, Dreamweaver, or Fireworks, like literally pixel perfect stuff, or like just creating backgrounds with like tables and stuff. But like now, like there's so many different devices that like obviously responsive has been around for a long time now, but it's I find it's less about it has to be perfect now. It's more like just make it as fluid as possible to look good in as many scenarios as possible. And
Hmm.
that can be super challenging sometimes, but I know like I haven't messed around with it too much yet, but container queries kind of answers a lot of that too, I think. But it's I haven't I honestly I don't know about yourself, but I haven't really seen any projects like people talked about like we need container queries, and I don't really see anybody using them yet though.
Yeah. Yeah, same. I feel so called out by that, because I was just like, man, like if only we had container queries, I'd use them all the time. I just don't.
Yeah, no, it's like I because like we use Tailwind at work. A lot of people use Tailwind, and
Hmm.
uh, honestly, I think it's a great project. I know people have their opinions about it, but I think in general, I'm just a fan of utility CSS. And like Tailwind is just that on steroids, kind of, I think. But I, I was asking if anybody was using container queries with Tailwind, and Wes Boss mentioned there was a plugin, and so I checked it out, but I didn't end up using it yet, and it's like, I don't know, I find like
Yeah.
I'm not in that mindset yet. I'm still like grid is great for a lot of things, and Flexbox still works really well for a ton of things. And the fact that you got, gap there's just a lot of things that just work really well with those two things that at least what I've had to work on, I haven't had to have a need for container queries, although maybe it would make it easier. Um, so it's yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious when
Uh,
the tipping point is when people will really start using it. So
yeah, I mean, I've actually had to fight. When I say fight, this is not like hasn't been like a serious battle, but like there was a movement for a while pre Tailwind to move away from like global, media queries, and that
mhm.
the whole idea of container media queries is like in a component world where everything is component,
Yeah,
like a component should lay itself out the same regardless of the context it's in, you know
yeah,
like only the component knows about its contents, and the component itself can make the best decision on how it lays itself out. And so there was like a
Yeah.
little bit of movement. I didn't think it picked up a lot of steam because it's just a lot of work. And especially without
Yeah.
container queries, it's even harder. But there's this idea where like a component just sets its own breakpoints, where it just sets its own reasonable breakpoints of when it needs to rearrange, it does.
Yeah,
But it's like
exactly.
container queries didn't exist then. And then since then, like people just have gotten so used to just the global media queries, and like it's
Yeah.
just gotten like like just from SAS to Tailwind to styles, it's like all these things just kind of baked in this idea of like
Yeah.
global breakpoints where everything just respects the global breakpoints. So
Yeah.
I don't maybe the movement will kind of it didn't get very much traction, and even
Yeah.
internally it's like I don't care enough about this to like fight tooth and nail
Yeah,
to
yeah.
for us to have 1,000 breakpoints instead of three. So because
Yeah,
it's
no,
still it's
totally.
kind of a dumb argument like on its own. It's like, no, it's like content is king and blah blah blah. But
Yeah. And like if the tools like I'm using right now do the job well, like I'm not against using new tools. It's just I haven't had a moment yet where I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this unless I use container queries. That hasn't happened yet, or at least maybe I'm just working on components that aren't complex enough. I don't know. I don't think that's the case, but I just yeah, it was just really funny because like I just remember following it over the years, and people were like, "We need him, we need him, we need him." Articles and articles about it, and then they're like, "Here you go." And it's like, and that's not a knock on the work done on that. Like all that stuff's amazing. Like it's like CSS has had major upgrades over the past 5 years. Like it's kind of bananas how much stuff you can do with CSS now. Like um, which is huge. But yeah.
yeah, I mean, people ask for nesting and they got nesting, and so everyone, hopefully you're
Yeah, like
using CSS nesting now because
yeah, native nesting, that's pretty big. Like that's been I don't know. I think that was a really good move, you know. There was clearly a lot of adoption from like SAS, and I can't remember, did Less do nesting as well? I feel like they did. I use mainly SAS, but
yeah, same. I only had to use less, which like okay, I'm tinkering with Bootstrap, and other than that, no.
okay, cool, cool, cool. Okay, so yeah, no, that's awesome. So yeah, so you've been working on Terrazzo. You're also working at Figma on their design system, and Terrazzo kind of ties into something we were kind of talking about briefly when we were first chatting about streaming again. But like you've been working in open source for quite a long time now, and I think it's kind of fitting to maybe just touch on it because one, I'm sure it's an interesting story, but also it's close to Hacktoberfest, and I know every year there's always new people that are want to getting into open source, and a lot of people are intimidated by it or like what do I contribute to, etc. So I'd just be curious to hear your own story of like just how it all started for you, or like yeah, like why you even decided to go into open source.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, when people like want to get into open source, like I think it's important to like kind of separate the motivations,
Hmm.
Like, I mean, just like anything. I mean, like some of us want to get to open source because like we want recognition and we want like, fame, or just like we want to like leave a legacy.
Yeah.
um that can be tough to like orchestrate on your own time period, like
Yeah.
and that's something I hear a lot when people ask how do I get involved in open source. Like I keep on checking on these repos, and like like I don't know how to fit in, but what they're talking about is like the most popular projects with hundreds or thousands of contributors, and like
Yeah.
yeah, like there actually might not be space for you to contribute there,
Yeah, totally.
but for every one of those like huge famous projects, there's probably I tell people just like look at like your package JSON like in your own, like in your own projects that you work on. Like actually like think about like kind of go through each one, kind of poke a little bit more. Like chances are over 90% of them need help and need
Oh yeah.
contributions and have easy like take an hour of your time like issues that you could just pop in and fix, right? But
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't
totally.
have like 10,000 GitHub stars and 100 contributors. So I mean, yeah, just kind of start there. But how I got involved in open source was, um, I mean, I was kind of working on websites I was building websites in like middle school and high school. for
Okay.
fun. And I think it was well into my second job. I mean, like, 5 years of just like never touching open source, never really thinking about it. And I used it. I just like never really, just didn't really occur to me that like, oh, like people actually volunteer their time to
Yeah, yeah,
build the tools. And here I am, like probably like for 5 years, I'd complain like, oh, how come this doesn't work? How come this project that exists for free based on volunteer work, how come it didn't anticipate my needs?
yeah, yeah. Totally.
And I was working on some like I was feeling comfortable in CSS. I kind of I was at a point in my career where I was like front end had become a term because I started before front end, the term front end existed. I was just kind of doing like quote unquote full stack, which full stack was just opening up Dreamweaver and then just saving on the
Yeah,
FTP server and then using file lock so someone else didn't save on it. So like no version control, complete chaos of just like
yeah,
editing, yeah, just doing it live, saving on the server, PHP, WordPress nonsense chaos. Um, but um, I was, I hit a point where I was kind of feeling, React was taking off, Webpack was taking off, and I kind of felt like, oh, I'm kind of being left behind. There's this like
mm,
JavaScript revolution happening, and I feel like all my knowledge is like styling and kind of like old school jQuery and stuff. Like, oh man, I'm gonna get left in the dust if I don't learn about what this React thing is.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but in kind of in seeing all this stuff come out, I'm like, oh man, I got to catch up. But then when I actually like put the time, I mean, this was like a year of me just like following people, revisiting my knowledge, challenging my own assumptions. And then by the time I caught up, I kind of started to see like, oh, there's gaps in this. Like you kind of hear
yeah,
the marketing hype, and then it takes a long time, it takes a lot of learning. But then um, like when I was like actually using Webpack, I'm like, oh man, like they don't have like good like image like loaders or like at the time like you can just do the bare minimum, but it's like I actually wanted to optimize my images,
okay,
based on like a Webpack loader. Like I wanted to be able to resize with like a query. And so that was my first open source contribution was like I started like putting together a Webpack loader to like optimize the image the way that I was doing it manually. But it was just taking me a ton of time. I was just working on like a lot of like content heavy sites, not so much
yeah, yeah.
like, not so much like dashboards and apps. It was like a lot of like blog posty stuff. And so I wrote a
But
Webpack
images,
loader and like,
obviously.
yeah. And so and like no one used it, and that's fine, but that was like my first kind of like, foray into open source is just like finding a gap and then just kind of like just throwing it out there,
Okay,
and just kind of moving on. And I think it was like it was probably like, 6 or 7 of those just like find a gap, like solve it for myself, throw it on GitHub, and then just kind of keep going. Um,
yeah,
and then like kind of two things happened simultaneously. I was working at a startup, and then we were working on open API types, and I had never worked with
okay,
it before. And we're just transitioning into TypeScript. And so there was just
okay,
no good tools to like just take types out of that open API schema.
okay,
And so like there was like some Swagger code gen stuff, but it involved like installing the Java binary, and it was slow as hell, and it didn't really generate types. It generated like 2 megabytes of just JavaScript gunk that like the types didn't even half work. And it was like so it generated like an SDK, but I just wanted types out of it. And so me and a coworker just kind of slapped something together and then just did the same thing, just open sourced it. And then like kind of around that time, I had been working with Webpack for like a couple years, and I just got so fed up with it. And then I was when like, why don't we just use ECMAScript modules? Like
yeah,
browsers support them now. Why don't we just throw the bundler away? And then I started like open sourcing some stuff, and then ran across like Fred's work, who'd been working on like Pika Pack and Pika Web and all these other stuff that kind of like led to Snowpack. So messaged
Fred
him.
K. Shot for the folks if they're not aware.
Fred K. Shot, yeah, my apologies.
I don't no, no worries, no worries.
Of Astro notoriety, and so we worked on Pika Web for a while. That became Snowpack, or like it was a play on like No Pack, like No Bundler. So yeah, and then OpenAPI TypeScript just hit like a million downloads on npm. Um, and it's like there's no fundamental difference between like the projects that become successful and the projects that aren't. It's just like some projects just other people just have the same use case as you, and then
Yeah,
some don't. But it's like every single project has started out the exact same way. Just like I hit a roadblock and I look up and there's just a gap that needs to be filled, you know? And I've hit this gap just like tens of thousands of other people have also hit a gap and then
yeah,
built something. And so a lot of stuff just doesn't get open source. It's just the difference of just like you probably have built something and you just didn't think to open source it because it's
yeah.
not good enough. But I don't know how to like if you haven't looked at my code, like nothing should encourage you to open source more than looking at the crap that I just open source. So like if I can do it, anybody can do it. Just the thing that you build to get over your hurdle, just throw it on
Yeah,
GitHub. But add an open license. You have
yeah,
it has to have a license, otherwise no one can use it. Just putting it out there isn't enough. You have to license it. You have to say this has a license. There's a pretty famous example of like JS Hint having like
oh,
a
okay.
non-license. There's a really good blog post called "You May Now Use JS Hint for Evil."
Oh,
Um, and the story is when JS Hint, the kind of predated ESLint for by a couple of years. JS Hint was licensed with a like only use for good, not evil license.
okay.
Well, companies couldn't use it because in a court of law, you can't defend that like your company is using it for good. Therefore, you are within not within breach of that license. So because of that, like it was just kind of like a glib, like the intentions are clear, right? But like when
Yeah,
you actually try and like defend, like we are not within breach of this license because this copyright holder, yada
yeah,
yada. So they kind of like eventually relicensed it, and there's this whole like this is really interesting write up on like how actually the creators like I'm not saying it would have overtaken ESLint, but I'm saying like the license is a huge reason why there aren't as many users of JS Hint is because I just didn't license it properly in the beginning and I should have.
yeah.
So
I was gonna say that because like I did use JS Hint for a while. I didn't run into that issue because it was more open source, I think. But yeah, then like ESLint just exploded, and um, but yeah, I guess that's a testament to like you said, like definitely license things, document things. Like it's not guaranteed that your project's gonna be amazing if you have amazing docs, but I can definitely say most of the amazing projects I've used, including Astro, have great documentation. So there's that. I definitely think there's a correlation there, and like education around your project, whether that's people just talking about it, blogging about it as well too. But like the I don't know. I feel like really good docs are kind of table stakes these days for a project. You probably could have gotten away with it in the early. Like I remember Webpack initially, because this is like before meta frameworks. Like I don't know about. It sounds like you were that person too, but I always had to be the person to configure Webpack. I don't know why, but it just happened. And from what I remember, I don't remember the docs being super amazing in the beginning. They did get a lot better, and then they got some better defaults as well, so you had less to configure. Um, but but the fact that that was open source was huge because like I remember running into an issue where I think it was I was working at Autodesk and it was me configuring Webpack again, but there was one of the Webpack loaders that I was using wasn't working, and like in the end it was I just misread the docs, but basically because the code was there, I was able to literally step through the code with my config, see what was happening when my config got loaded, and I was able to go like, oh, that thing doesn't exist, or it didn't go into this like if block because this thing was missing, and like I think that's something that maybe not people with a lot more experience, but I find a lot of people often forget like the code is literally there. Like yes, you can use it, but like the code is literally there. You can learn from it. Looking at
hmm
people's PRs, like you can see the whole context of like, because like sometimes people say like, why did you put in that feature, and then you can read the context and there's good reasons why that was done that way, and it could have been like from yesteryear too. Like, like this was done 5 years ago because these were the constraints. Like maybe it could be improved now and stuff. And I just think uh, the other thing like that I think people miss sometimes is you have all the historical context. You can
Mhm.
literally look at everything about the project pretty much. So I think that's just a cool aspect of open source that I think people sometimes forget, even though it's pretty obvious, I think. But
Yeah, yeah, kinda hiding right under your nose. Yeah.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I've heard, for years, like, oh, like, sometimes I just read code, you know?
yeah,
And I think, like, for a lot of people, they're just like, "How? Like, are you a robot?"
yeah, yeah,
And, like, it's tough for me to just, like, just sit down with a cup of coffee and then just, okay,
yeah, yeah,
page 1, source index.js, and me just reading. But yeah, like you said, like, there's certain things where it's like my first time diving into, like, how a plugin works, right? Because it's just like
yeah,
magic. Like, from the outside, I know how to configure it, but inside, it's like, I have no clue what's going on here. And,
yeah,
uh like that Ralph Wiggum meme. It's like I open up the file, like, chuckles, I'm in danger. Like, because I just don't I understand it even less. I'm even more scared now that I opened up the file. But
yeah,
like tools like VS Code is like a Git lens plugin, which I use all the time. And
yeah,
just like if you're opening it in VS Code, like I can like go to like just a line. And then usually what happens is like you see patterns of just like this plugin, like if I'm like looking at like core code, like this plugin was like made by the plugin author, and then it
yeah,
has like a little pop-up that shows me a link to the pull request that it like
yeah,
entered in. And usually a lot of the code is like in the initial state of like they kind of patched it and bug fixed it, right? But like most of the code kind of got added like in that first pass. And like if I don't understand the code that's being written, I just click on that little pop-up in VS Code, opens up the PR in GitHub, and then I see these like notes and I see these docs. And to me, that helps me understand it more than like, yeah, the
yeah,
techniques are really good, but like the context of like, why was this made? When was this made? What problem
hmm,
was it solving? And then putting all that in context, and then like kind of the light bulb for me personally clicks. And everyone's different,
yeah,
but like I
yeah,
love reading those PR notes. Like I read way more PR notes than people realize. So
yeah,
that's why like sometimes I'll kind of comment like, hey, like just like why does this PR exist? Like I'll just have the blank template. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
fill this out. Like, I'm gonna read this like in like 3 months. I'm gonna need this.
Yeah, and that in terms of like adding comments and stuff, that's the other cool thing. This because it's open source, like that PR is merged unless they've locked. I don't know if you can lock comments on a PR. You can lock them on an issue, but like you can literally just go there like, hey, thanks for this plugin. I'm curious why you decided on blah blah blah. They don't have to answer obviously, but like it's like an open forum for you to still ask questions or like provide any kind of feedback, which I think is cool too. And it's I don't know. I know there are people who have definitely had bad experiences open source, like there's maintainer burnout and stuff, but uh, like one of the cool things I found was like when I used to work at Dev 2, I was leading front end over there, and we were using Preact, but it was like a Rails monolith. So I basically kind of made us have kind of bespoke islands architecture because like in Rails, like Preact, well, not just Preact, but like literally any of these frameworks, you just have like a root DOM node to say this is where my app starts. And
Mm,
so like with the Preact stuff, you could literally just say like here's a pocket of interactivity, here's a pocket, and then like you'd have some minimal JS to bootstrap it or whatever. But I remember running into an issue and I wasn't asking Jason Miller for help, the creator of Preact, but I just happened to pop my PR on Twitter and say like, "Oh yeah, working on this, trying to figure something out." And Jason was working at Google at the time. He's maintaining Preact. He took the time out of his day to just jump into my PR and like just say, "Oh, try this or try this," and I thought that was amazing. I'm not saying that's gonna happen all the time, but like that was pretty cool to me. Like and I don't know, maybe it's just the Canadian connection. Who knows?
I didn't realize he was Canadian. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's from around where West Boss is, like around Hamilton, Ontario-ish. But anyways, yeah, a lot of there's a lot of JavaScript power in the 6.1 what is it? It's Toronto 905. I don't know. They got a few area codes now.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I don't
yeah,
know.
but
Um, yeah, no, you're right. It does happen. Like, it's like you can't expect, maintainers to do anything for you because they're volunteer, but like, I mean,
yeah,
they're volunteering. So I mean, like, yeah, if you work on a problem enough, you do kind of, cross paths with these luminaries and, get some wisdom,
yeah,
from on high. It's really cool.
yeah, and that's the other thing too. Getting back to like looking at the code or reading the PRs, these like luminaries or people. I don't want to say people you look up to, but like people you think are pretty awesome in the space. Like they're doing open source as well, and like you. So it's like, hey, I want to level up my skills. How does Jason Miller make Preact performant? You could just start going looking at the code there. I mean, obviously not everybody's gonna do that, but like, what I mean? There's like literally like prior art, like this is how you do amazing performance. Go check out this project, and I think it's like stating the obvious, but I still think a lot of people just don't necessarily look at these projects that way. That's more like npm install, move on, kind of. So I'm generalizing though. So like,
Yeah.
you know, but I that's the impression I get generally, I think. But
Yeah. No, it is useful. Yeah. I mean, like, sometimes the problems are really deep where it's just like I don't have enough time to like understand all the reasons why you did it. But even
yeah,
just like taking like you just like a shallow view of it, of like like in a company, if you're looking at your own code, like sometimes, as we all know, the things that kind of evolve naturally are not always best practice. They're just kind of like they
yeah,
just kind of got around a roadblock and then got around a roadblock, and then the ultimate form is just kind of this. It's like, why is it this way? It's like, I don't know, don't worry about it. Like a bunch of weird stuff
yeah,
happened. But like, in a shallow view, if the more experience you have with other open source projects, the more you can kind of see, like sometimes when you hit a roadblock, there's more than one way to solve a problem, and the more experience you have with just looking at what other projects do. I mean, like a
yeah,
lot of projects do kind of run into like generally the same problems, like even
yeah,
like a common example is just like just testing frameworks, like
yeah,
if you've ever tried to use like Jest and ECMAScript modules, like it's pretty painful still because it's still in
yeah,
beta, and then but like the more or even just like slow npm installs, if you just look at like what a lot of newer open source projects are using, they're using vtest for testing, which is fantastic, and they're
yeah,
using pnpm, which like some of the pnpm stuff, I love PNPM, and this was like having like yarn burnout, but like it's faster. There's so many quality of life tools, and if you manage more than one package in the same monorepo, like there's so many like neat tools that it does. And also, if you don't learn anything, it just works just like npm. Like all the commands are
yeah,
the same. You just put a little p in, so it's like sometimes like just having just those like, oh, like I actually just see, I don't know why they did it, but I know 10 open source projects that just use X tool.
yeah,
Maybe we should like bring that into our workspace. And then a lot of times people are like, I hadn't even heard of that. Like, oh my God, this solves our use case. That was way
yeah.
better than what we were going to do.
No, totally. And like I think Veet's a great example of that. Like I don't know the history completely, but like Veet came out of Vue, like Evan You created it, and I think it was based off of roll up and a few other things, but like he saw a need for like Vue, I need something like this. And then I guess at some point I don't know if it was part of the Vue core at all or if it was always a separate project, but like eventually it was like, you know, in a certain way that it could be consumed by other projects. So and obviously it's taken off. And what's Fuzzy saying? Oh my God, Drew, you got to tell us about the Snowpack to Veet migration you did for us. Okay, so I don't
Yeah.
know how long that story is, but I'm up for it if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, so like V was kind of like based off Snowpack, or they were kind of like cyclical around the same time. So like
Okay,
Evan and Fred were kind of like collaborating on some things because at that point Snowpack had been released and people started to use it. And for those that don't haven't used Snowpack, it was kind of in a world where like Webpack dominated. I like to take credit of like, like Fred pushing it forward and me helping Fred. Of oh, yeah, the website's still online.
Yeah, yeah, I was surprised it was still up, but it is, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just in a world where Webpack was just predominant, and it's just you know, things just were really slow. Like you were running everything through Node.js, which is fine for many problems, but for extremely file read write heavy and transpilation, we had just gotten to a tipping point where like it's not that Node.js was the bottleneck, but it was the file system coupled with we had just stacked up years and years and years and years of like Babel and transpilers and all this stuff. It just kind of added up to a point where like it was
Yeah,
solving problems that didn't exist anymore. And so Snowpack was like and just asking a question: can we just do away with bundlers now that like ECMA, like modules are now in the JavaScript language?
yeah,
I swear this is all answering the. This is part of the story. I'm not just I'm not just derailing. But yeah, like all of it was just part of the language. So it's just like, can we use the browser? Can we use the language? There's all these new JavaScript features that have been like, codified that are now supported in browsers. Can we just like, how can we like just get back to just using JavaScript, and how can we reduce the bundler to what's minimal,
yeah,
so Snowpack was just asking that question, and then kind of in pursuit of that, funny enough, like Figma, like one of the co-founders of Figma, like released a WASM based transpiler called ESBuild, which was to solve some problems that Figma had because Figma was like an early adopter of WASM, to speed things up.
yeah,
And so, Snowpack early on kind of got on the ESBuild rollup thing where like ESBuild can't do everything that Webpack does, but for
yeah,
most people, it does most of what they need, right? And then Rollup just kind of fills in the gaps.
yeah,
And if you haven't used Rollup has been around for, I don't know how it relates in terms of Webpack, but I mean, Rollup has been around for a while. Rollup has been
yeah,
used to like, package React since as long as I can remember. And Rollup is in some ways kind of like lower level than Webpack, if you can even imagine that. But
yeah,
like, so sometimes in Rollup you can end up with more config than Webpack, but you can do more customizable stuff. Um, so this ES build rollup combination was kind of the core engine. Fred did a ton of work in having his own man's a genius, like having his own like npm registry where like he was like converting stuff to ESM, which like kind of became
yeah.
Skypack, but it was like like the peak of CDN before that.
Okay, yeah,
That's all just kind of separate. So Snowpack was kind of like like a larger ecosystem, but you know uh it was successful in some ways. Snowpack was like a reduction in just what the bundler was able to do. I think we there were some really good ideas that I think are still actually kind of in limbo, like the idea of like how can we like minimally bundle so that the browser can make better decisions over like
yeah,
serving JavaScript. We kind of hit an issue mostly with like Cascade, right, where like if you just deliver a JavaScript file to the browser, there's import statements at the top. But if you think
yeah,
about like the network, like it has to download that file, parse the file, import statement, oh, gotta fetch something else, download that
yeah,
file, import statement at the top, download that file, so like some of those things, even when we tried to like intelligently like flatten it and tried to like combine some stuff, you always end up bundling something so you don't have these like, because if you look in node modules, sometimes these change like 50 links deep,
yeah, yeah,
and you don't want to wait for like 50 files to load serially, before you can like
uh,
interact with the page. So um there's actually some like TC39 specifications about like bundling. Uh, like there's some TC39 specifications into JavaScript that kind of build on the idea of like, what if we could like live in like a bundler less, that's a hard word to say, world, that are
yeah,
still like stage zero, still experimental. I don't know if there's been movement on them lately, but that kind of like thinking has kind of permeated, right? But Veet was like a really in pursuit of Snowpack being the ideal. What is the absolute theoretical bare minimum? the bundler could take. Vite
Yeah.
was kind of just like a like really really good compromise, that came out of like looking at Snowpack, even like in the first Vite conf, like V0 used Snowpack internally for to like transpile some stuff, and then I think also like the internals ended up taking a different direction, probably for the better. Um, but I think it was just a realistic compromise of just like, okay, we're not in a world where we can truly live without a bundler, and we still
Yeah.
need to bundle some things, but also we can actually shed years of weight of like what Webpack has had to do, and it was just kind of like a really good realistic compromise, just kind of resetting the needle of like Vite was just the appropriate engineering solution to where the JavaScript language was at the time, and how websites were being built and just the common
Yeah.
needs. And it was one of those things where like that law where like with enough eyes all bugs became shallow.
Yeah.
So I think also just having the visibility of like like Evan you like very talented engineer, very smart, but like just like anything, it's like the real power of Vite was just like having contributors, having users, having people kick the tires on it, and contribute to it to make it better for their use case. Because Fuzzy talks about like the transition to from Snowpack to V.
Yeah.
Like we actually, because we wrote Astro the first cut in Snowpack,
Yeah.
and then it was working great. And V didn't do a lot of stuff that Snowpack did at the time.
Hmm.
And so I remember even like saying to Fred, like, I don't, we can't switch to V. It doesn't do X, Y, Z. And Fred's like, I don't know, like we can't maintain Astro and a bundler underneath,
Yeah.
like just like the whole, it's like too much, because at that time, V, even though it couldn't fill all the features, V still had more contributors, whereas like Snowpack was just like me, Fred, Nate, Matthew, versus like V had like, already had like dozens and dozens of people contribute, so Fred
Yeah.
wisely saw like, okay, like the momentum of V is already like, it's picking up more momentum than Snowpack. It doesn't solely rely on us to kind of move the needle forward. So yeah, I was in charge of kind of like rewriting it to V. And in the process, we were opening up pull requests against V, a lot of stuff around like ESM, like modern module support. We were
Yeah.
adding in V because V was still back compiled to CommonJS, a lot of the
Okay.
internals earlier. And now Vite is like fully ESM.
Yeah.
So like yeah, I mean, we weren't responsible for Vite, not taking credit for it, but we just kind of like, we just kind of did our part along with the dozens of other amazing contributors to just like, if everyone just kind of like just contributes a little bit, then it was in really short order. V already like matched everything we needed from Snowpack, and then just took off from there and became even more
Yeah.
stable and more reliable. And it is a fantastic tool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is amazing, and I remember this didn't get merged when I worked at Dev2. Also, hey Chris in the chat, good to see you, my man. And just wanted to mention, thanks for the follow, Rabbi482. Uh, um, I think the thing that blew my mind with Vite was like, so at Dev2, like I was saying, it was a Rails monolith, so they have their whole asset pipeline, and we were using Webpacker at the time, which was just basically the way to use Webpack within there. And, it would take quite a while to bundle things sometimes. And I did this proof of concept. It didn't get merged, and then I ended up going elsewhere, but I remember trying Vite, and no joke, I think it went from like sometimes like the build would be anywhere between 30 seconds and a minute to like point 7 seconds, because and I didn't realize that, like, once I looked under the hood a bit, I realized what Vite was doing was it wasn't even bundling in development mode. It just said use native ESM. Like I'm assuming that's how it still works. I'm not sure, but uh,
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, yeah and no. It still has to like prepare the node modules and stuff. But yeah, it basically only it bundles on demand, only what you actually load in that given instant. So rather than like, your whole dependency tree, like if
okay,
it hits a page, it only does what's necessary for that page. But it also skips a ton of optimizations too, where it's just like it just does the bare minimum, just get this running on the page.
okay, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
also it's just like just using WebAssembly, it's just like WebAssembly is faster.
yeah,
Like a lot of transpilation is it's just the wacky way we write JavaScript, the way that we write it in the file.
mhm,
Like just historically it's had to go through like some back compatibility, like even like we used to like use require or like
yeah,
import. A browser didn't understand what require or import was. So we had to do some
yeah,
wacky stuff to like even get it running in the browser. So the browsers didn't throw up an error. It's like this isn't JavaScript or I don't understand this. So
yeah,
like um, the way that we've written JavaScript, we just gotten in the habit of writing JavaScript that is not the target of where it runs, and
yeah,
that's just the path we've taken. So in pursuit of that, it's just we've ended up with a really wacky tool chain to handle that.
yeah,
Um, and
and
yeah, it's tough to always keep track of just those like these two moving things of like the language moves at one speed and then the
yeah,
targets move at another speed because there's browser and Node.js and Electron, which is its own.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
but yeah, I mean, just the process of taking the thing that you're writing and then turning it into something else, like that's just been it's been not only like a wacky, really complex tool chain, but also like the tools we use, like WebAssembly is just better at it. Like if you
Yeah,
think of a JavaScript as like a string and you want like a different string out of it, like
yeah,
WebAssembly is really good at like take string, make different string out of it. Like WebAssembly is just the best at that. Beyond that, like there's so many limitations to it. Like you don't just get everything faster by just making it WebAssembly.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but specifically for transpilation of like I have string A, I want string B, I want this JavaScript app, but with all the import
yeah,
statements compiled and with it flattened together. If you think of like your entire JavaScript app as a string, WebAssembly is really stinking good at that. And that
yeah.
is the right tool for that job.
Yeah, and there's a reason why there's stuff like SWC, which is in Rust, but not your whole tool chain. Like, because I think I've dabbled in Rust a bit. I definitely would not say I'm a Rustation, but I there was a lot of chatter initially, like all dev tooling needs to be in Rust now because it's faster, and there's definitely merits to that because, like, to your point, what you were saying, like it's really good at string manipulation, because it can just do that fast, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like the entire thing. And like RSpack is another interesting one, which is like the
Hmm.
Webpack equivalent where it's mainly in Rust, but I think you can actually still write plugins and loaders in JavaScript. I'm not positive about that. I haven't been keeping up with the project, um, but yeah, I guess it's like use it where it's necessary and where it makes sense to get bang for your buck. Um, and it's
Hmm.
I think the other thing interesting too is like, you know, people will complain about Webpack like when they were using it or even now, and they're like, oh, Veet's awesome, and which it is. But like, Veet would not exist without Webpack, and like Webpack probably wouldn't have existed without Browserify, and like, you know what I mean? Like it's like things evolved over time, like you were saying, like the language changed, the browsers got better, so like the tooling can improve, and like maybe for some of the older projects they weren't able to like, it's a lot easier when you're a greenfield project to just say, hey, we're just going to do this, not having to worry about all the legacy. So I don't know. I always like to kind of mention that because like when people just knock other projects, it's just like it's not like respect your elders kind of thing, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, like Fuzzy said in the chat, like standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah,
It's I mean that open source, it's like it's not a zero sum game.
yeah,
You see like Hacktoberfest is coming up, people want to get involved in open source, like spoiler alert, like
yeah,
a lot of what you get from contributing to open source is just good warm feelings that you're making a difference in the world.
yeah,
It doesn't result in payment, doesn't result in, but yeah, it doesn't help anyone to like bash projects. Like i
yeah,
think i think like if we're all honest, like we can talk technically of like this solution has shortcomings, this has pitfalls, like that's just
yeah,
engineering. But
yeah,
like yeah, it's like you can say like Webpack has these issues A, B, and C, and also it transformed how we do everything. It was a necessary step in the process. It was
yeah,
engineered correctly at the time that it was made, and stuff has changed since initial design,
Yeah, totally.
like none of that stuff is bashing the project,
Yeah,
all these are just kind of like like we all benefit from just sharing more stuff. But I don't
yeah,
know.
totally.
Haters gonna hate, as they say.
Yeah. But like to your point, how like when the Astro team started adopting Vite, you were contributing upstream to it, which was amazing. And like I know from like because I worked on the frameworks team at Netlify, you know, all the frameworks, the majority of the frameworks use Vite, and they've all been contributing to Vite just to make Vite better in general. Like, I think initially Vite didn't support SSR, and I can't remember who contributed that because I remember Ryan Carniato from Solid.js. There was definitely improvements he made. Like my coworker Brandon, who works on Analog JS, uses Vite as well for his Angular meta framework. Like, and so like getting back to your like it's not a competition, and oh, I guess my reactions thing is on. I just got pop it up there. Usually that freezes my camera, but you know what I mean. It's like, hey, I this is something I need to improve my project, but you know what? Maybe it'll improve other people's projects too, and like that's where I think it's cool in open source. And like, obviously, at the end of the day, some of these companies are in open source but are still trying to make money. But like, you know, I think it's good to just contribute back to the ecosystem. And I'm definitely not a religious person, but I kind of believe in karma. I think if you put out good there, like good will come back to you. Maybe that's some form of religion, I guess. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it all does. Yeah, it all just come back to you for sure. And yeah, it, like both things are true. Like in open source, like it is good if you are using something and if you find a gap, if you have time, plug it. If not,
yeah,
like don't worry about it. Don't feel guilty too.
yeah,
Like I also have been like there's times when like there's been existing projects, it's like maybe they fill a need that they have, but I also am
yeah,
just like I want to make this because I want to go through the exercise of learning myself,
yeah,
like
totally.
even like like something like Cobalt was just like, can I use Style Dictionary to do what I want? It's like, yeah, but like
Mhm.
I also kind of want to like revisit these decisions and like I kind of just want
Yeah,
to do it for my own gratification. And I'm volunteering my time either way. Like open
yeah,
source also is like uh just do what makes you happy too, because like you're not getting paid one way or the other.
yeah, yeah, totally.
So and so like if you contribute to existing projects, that's great, do it. If you want to build your own thing, that's great, do it. Like I hear like sentiment sometimes of like don't fragment the ecosystem, or I've had people say to me like I'd rather contribute to your project than start my own thing, and
Yeah,
I tell people like no, start your own thing. Like that's great. Like you're not
yeah,
hurting me. Like I don't feed my family based off of like GitHub stars, like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like to putting your ideas out there. Like sometimes like you actually might have better ideas than me, and starting
Mhm.
your own project you don't even realize how good your ideas are. Just like you're actually not fragmenting the ecosystem, like you're giving
Yeah,
people more options, and your option
totally.
actually might be better than mine. And like great, like any contribution to an existing project, to your own project, any contribution, if you open source it, all of it benefits, all of it is useful.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And it's like I've even done stuff where like I remember because like I got into React and TypeScript pretty early. Like I was working at a Microsoft shop and like TypeScript came out in 2012, which a lot of people aren't aware of. They still think it's a lot newer than that. But like they just said at our shop, we're like, okay, well, we're a Microsoft shop. We're gonna do TypeScript. So this is like 2015, and we were using Angular. And anyways, this is like pre Angular 2 when they moved to TypeScript and stuff as well.
Mhm.
Um, and this is kind of like around the time where I decided to get into open source because like um, maybe my mind would have been a little in a different place at the time, but like at the time Microsoft wasn't really big into open source in like the mid 2010s. Like .NET Core, which is like and like all the .NET stuff is open source now, C sharp and all that. But this wasn't the case initially, and I really wanted to get into open source. I was always a fan of JavaScript, and so that's how I kind of started contributing. I started working on this open source project that was using Meteor for folks that remember the Meteor JS project. I didn't know anything about it. I just said, yeah, I know that a bit. And I
Yeah.
just
Sasha
started
Greff,
contributing.
was that it?
Yeah, 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 and it's kind of funny. Like I was talking with Michael Chan, who's over at uh, what is it, OS, Work OS now, but um, like the Apollo, like the GraphQL company, they came out of Meteor JS. Like some of those people, and
I
some of
didn't
the
know
people
that.
from and Storybook came out of Meteor, like from the community. But then I think other people from the Meteor project ended up working on Storybook too and stuff, and it's like it just kind
Hmm.
of like created this nice little explosion of other projects. But what I was getting at was like I wanted to work in open source. I was also interested in React. We weren't going to use React at work. This is 2015, so like 2 years after React's out. It's still pretty fresh, I guess. So I started contributing to an open source boilerplate for React because like prior to meta frameworks, having a boilerplate template was basically how you did it, and then we got Create React app and all that stuff after. But between that and like Dan Abramov had this free Egghead IO course on Redux,
Hmm.
um, and basically one of the things I did was I rebuilt Redux on my own. Like I watched his videos and
Oh,
stuff,
cool. Yeah.
but I and it was more of a learning exercise. It wasn't like for me to just say like check out better Redux, but it was really just to understand what was going on, and I found that super helpful. Getting back to your point about like just put stuff out there, or if you just want to learn something, tinker, and like I think the cool thing about open like it's funny. I'm in a virtual coffee community, but and like they always know I'm gonna say open source is a great way to put yourself out there. But it really is honestly like job wise, it's helped me. I contributed to projects I was interested in, like Dev 2. I started contributing to it, got hired there. Uh,
Hmm.
Open source where I'm at now, I was contributing to the projects a bit too and stuff. And not to say that you're guaranteed you're gonna get a job in a project, but it definitely helps that you're interested in the project. And like this has happened on other projects, like the React core team hired other people like Sophie Bits. Eventually, they were contributing a lot. And I've seen this happen on other projects. I don't know if this happened on Astro too. If you had like I think Ben Holmes, yeah, Ben Holmes is a good example. Ben
Hmm.
Holmes, I remember live streaming with him. He was this was when I was at Dev 2 still. He was working on Slinkity, which was
Hmm.
this project for 11D, and then I think maybe Fred yourself or the team just saw that and like that's pretty cool. And like I I don't know all the things that were set in motion for Ben to go work there, but I'm pretty sure his open source work on that stuff was definitely part of it. And
Oh, yeah. It
so
absolutely was. Yeah.
yeah, so just like I don't know, I just typically don't see any bad outcomes of just putting yourself out there. Like obviously, like you said before, haters gonna be haters, but like if you can just kind of ignore that, easier said than done maybe sometimes. But and if you have the time and you want to do it, I think it's like amazing. Uh,
Yeah. And yeah, the with the Redux course, like you said, I think because I also watched that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, Dan actually said like you can make this on your own. I'm going to show you how to make it. That was kind of like the
yeah,
spirit of the, or you might not have used those exact words, but he pretty much was just like, yeah, make it yourself. That'd be great. So he
yeah,
also was encouraging of that. Like this is not some
yeah,
like secret. Like it's open source. There's no secrets.
yeah, and it's obviously there can be complex projects for sure, but I think a lot of times once you dig into things, like they're not as scary as they might seem to be, like even Webpack, people are like, oh my God, Webpack. And yes, there's definitely some complex code in there, but like the loaders and the plugins, they're not as intimidating as you think. Um, so it's just, I don't know, because maybe it's just because like I've worked with a lot of earlier career devs or people transitioning into tech, so I don't know if that's maybe why they kind of get a little intimidated. But I don't know. Again, it gets back to like I think if you just read a bit and see what's like, assuming the project has some decent documentation, the things aren't always as like magical or intimidating as you think they are. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, like sometimes I think like I'm amazed at like stuff that I'm able to do stuff I never thought I was able to do just by like
Yeah,
breaking it down and taking it one step at a time. Like this kind of a cheesy metaphor, but like I'm out here in Colorado, we hike a lot. We try and fulfill all the stereotypes, but like you know, doing a hard hike, you know, like there's all these times like you're looking up at this like mountain and there's like thousands of feet of elevation or you know hundreds of meters of elevation, and then like you just take it one step at a time and you're halfway up, you're like, I hate this was a mistake, like I could be watching TV right now. But then
yeah,
you just kind of like, yeah, okay, like no, it's fine, I'm just going to eat a snack and just kind of power through it. And then
yeah,
like you get to the top, you look down from where you walked and you're just like, I walked that far, that's
yeah, yeah,
crazy, you
totally.
know. And it's like, did I do it faster than anyone else? Like, no. Like, I had a horrible time. Like,
Yeah,
I took way more time than like the old trail said I was gonna, you know, whatever. I was slower,
yeah.
but like, you're
But you
still
did it.
amazed at what you're able to do. But I mean, a lot of projects are like that. You just like it seems insurmountable at first, but like, you know,
Yeah,
like just take it step by step, you know, and then like it becomes like the entire thing like doesn't get less complex. But like I
yeah,
think people are like you're capable of more than you think you are if you just like take it one step at a time. Because
yeah,
the way that these projects kind of evolved, or like, you know, like Webpack in itself, like Webpack as a whole, it is really complex, you know? Like
yeah,
there's no
totally.
way to dumb it down. It does so much stuff. But if like you said, if you actually look into the code, like it's meant to be like bite size for like people like yourself, you know? Like
Mhm.
it does so many things, but if you drill into a plugin, like everything is meant to just kind of do like one step at a time, and it's organized in a way that you can actually kind of find yourself slowly going through it, and it kind of makes sense the more you kind of wrestle
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, totally. And like for sure like if we like for example like the React project, it's definitely super complex now. You could potentially contribute to it, but the thing is you need to really have a lot of context in what's going on in there because like it's changed a lot. Like I never contributed to the code base, but I know like in the early days it was a lot easier to, but now like again, it's not impossible, but you just have to have a lot of context if you're gonna work in there. I think from what I've heard,
Yeah.
um, but but yeah, getting back to what you're saying, like just chipping away at it or just like doing more than you think you can do, like literally like this weekend I went with some friends on a bike trip. Like I don't usually road bike a lot. Like I mean I work out and stuff, but I don't really bike long distances regularly. And we did like 110 kilometers, which I don't know what that is.
Jeez.
Uh
Yeah.
over 2 days, but like I mean I got strong legs and stuff and I'm in somewhat decent shape, but I'm not like a biker per se. And like we did that 52 or whatever kilometers the first day. We took a break. It was kind of like a bike trip slash visit a vineyard, go to a beach, but like at the end of the day though, like
Nice.
it was like split up and it was like 52 clicks the first day and then like maybe 56ish or 58 the last one. But like I was like, I was still impressed with myself, like even though yes, there was some breaks and stuff, but like, I mean, I was a little sore yesterday, my legs a bit, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's just like you were saying, like just climbing that hill or whatever, like think, I don't know, you're more like not to sound like super motivational speaker, but you're more capable than you realize, I think, and people don't always realize that,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, like,
yeah.
yeah, famously, like the Babel project was just started by, you know, like someone who like had never worked with like a lot of like AST and transportation stuff, and now it's like foundational for the internet, you know.
Yeah,
Like I think
exactly.
if I might be misremembering, I think like, you know, Tobias Copper's creator of Webpack kind of said a similar thing about Webpack, you know, just like
Yeah,
had to serve a need, like hadn't really worked with this problem before, and now like, you know, he's one of
yeah,
the world's foremost experts on this like area of computer science, you know, just because
yeah,
yeah, like you don't have to have any prior experience, you know? Like if a problem interests
Totally.
you, just chip away at it. And like it's gonna feel impossible at first, but then every
Yeah.
day you kind of feel a little bit closer and you kind of and then you look back and you realize like, oh, like I did some really cool stuff.
Yeah. No, totally. And like just in regards to the Babel, it's like JavaScript hit like a stagnant point. Like they never shipped, I think, version 4, and it was like I don't know. There was like tons of stuff that was not in the language that we have today. And then like you said, like like if imagine if Babel was never open source. Imagine if it was just like some company used it. Like the JavaScript language would not have progressed. Well, who's to say? Obviously, because different timeline. But like like that accelerated like the adoption of new features in the language and stuff, and like honestly, it's like just skyrocketed like the popularity of JS as well too. I think like I don't know. It's like yeah, just like Webpack, like you're saying, like just projects like those we wouldn't have been able to move forward without those things, and it's amazing that they got open sourced. So
Yeah. Um yeah, and like kind of I mean back to what you're saying about like, you know, you making the just rewriting Redux or just people starting their own projects. Like I think too, you know, it's just the theme of people getting started in open source. Like um a problem can seem uh there's kind of like an illusion that maybe a problem is like more well trodden than it actually is when you actually start to dive in, you know.
yeah,
Like just to satisfy my own curiosity, like I've written some like color tools and like I wanted to like just learn more about color.
yeah,
And it started off with there's like a video that came out a couple years ago called like it was like the problem with like computer screens or the problem with computer color, and it was
okay,
all about how when you blend like a lime green and a red you get this like muddy, like this bad color. And
okay,
like it happens like on every blur effect. It happens on like the iPhone when like, you know, you're blurring the background. And it kind of just
okay,
talked about the science behind it. So I was just like, oh, that's really annoying. I hate that. I hate that muddy color, you know? And then it talked about like, yeah, so like the way to solve it is you just square it. And then I learned that like, okay, the math was bad. And then so I got a little bit deeper of like, okay, like how does, you know, how does color work? Like how does the RGB color work? It's like, oh, there's color spaces. What is that? And then just kind of like tripped, you know, just kind of tripping over myself one step further. And then kind of got to a place where like now I'm actually like writing like color math and color libraries. And
okay.
I actually like started writing like WebGL shaders and doing like GPU code and stuff, you know,
Super cool.
just kind of like in pursuit of this problem. And like I even learned you know, like there's like even like for JavaScript libraries, like there aren't like good like color picker libraries that use like WebGL canvas because
Okay,
for a lot of these color spaces, a lot of our monitors and all the JavaScript and CSS is all based on what's called sRGB color space, which is just
mm,
what most people think of when they think of RGB. They confuse
yeah,
it with sRGB, but
okay,
sRGB is like hex codes, you know, the RGB like 0 to 255. But when you dive into like nowadays, all Macs actually support higher color spaces than just sRGB. So like
yeah,
Macs can support more colors than what you can even get out of a hex code. And then how do you display that? You know, how do you build a
okay,
color picker? You can kind of like fall down the rabbit hole. And then my point is like I realized like even though you search your color picker, there's a bunch of them. I realized
yeah,
like none of them actually did the thing that I wanted to do, you know,
okay,
which is like support you know, different color spaces. There's like OK Lab, OK LCH, which you can
yeah,
use in CSS today. But even like some of the libraries that you use to like access that, or if you want to build a color picker that supports OK Lab, you know,
okay,
there's still not a good one. So um, like any problem that interests you, like just dig into it a little bit, and I guarantee you that there's way more gaps and way more opportunities for you to push it forward than there
yeah,
seems at first glance. Because you realize like search your color picker on npm, like
yeah,
you might hit like you might find like 20 of them, all 20 of them copied code from one another, and they solve the problem the same way. They just
yeah, yeah.
overlaid some CSS gradients, which is not how you actually get proper like proper color picker. You can't recreate it with CSS gradients, you know?
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of curious about this since you brought up color. Like, I like I definitely started with hex colors and typically using RGB, like and then there was like RGBA like with the alpha channel, and then like HSL, which is hue, saturation, and lighting. Is that it? Yeah.
Mhm.
And then, but I'm curious about these new colors, like because I have seen like Wes and Scott on Syntax were talking about them, and I think Adam Argyle or Una, is it Una or Una? I think it's Una. Um,
I've heard Yuna, but I'm not sure.
okay,
I haven't talked with him.
yeah, um, but um, but I'm curious, like you were saying, like so, like the newer Macs or like newer devices support these richer colors. Do you, if you were to like do CSS for those like set colors for certain things, would it be basically just doing a like does this device support OKL what is it OKCLH or
Yeah, LCH. Yeah, I
LCH?
mean the quick recommendation is just use OKLCH. It's
Okay,
great. It's supported in all browsers. There's Angry Martians have a they bought the domain oklch.com, which is a great
okay,
resource.
okay,
Uh, yeah, like OKLC. The tricky part is if you just like pick colors randomly, you can actually pick colors that are like brighter or more saturated than your monitor can support. Which, if
okay,
you do that, your monitor might just show white, which is not what you wanted most of the time.
okay,
But like as long as you're picking within like what most monitors can support, yeah, OKLCH is a great resource. And then I think on that website they have like links to blog posts where you can kind of dive deeper about that.
okay,
But yeah, like the TLDR of like color spaces is like if you look at like how the human eye works, like we have rods and cones, like the um I think it's the cones or perceive color and rods as light. I might be getting that wrong. But the parts
yeah,
of our eyeballs like kind of like map ish to RGB light a little bit.
okay,
Like we actually have like reddish cones and greenish cones and bluish cones. Like roughly, like there's some overlap where it's like, the red can have a little bit of blue and likewise. But if you look at like the studies, like and like color blindness is like one or more of the cones are not functioning properly or they don't pick up the full range.
yeah,
So like RGB is kind of like an approximation of how human light works. But I mean, like, if you know anything about the body, it's like bodies are weird. We don't like fit into like really simple math.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so like the color spaces are kind of like this is like a really like reductionist, but you can almost kind of think of them as like versions in a sense of like
okay,
every color space is kind of like a better version of like the math is a little more complex, but it gets a little closer to how we actually see color.
okay,
So like LCH is lightness, chroma, hue, and is
okay,
you notice it's one letter off from HSL. I think they also just might have reversed it just to like
okay,
just so people don't confuse the two. I don't know why they
okay,
did
yeah,
that, but it's like it is functionally the same as HSL. We have
okay, cool,
H and L are the same. They work the exact same way. Instead of saturation, they use chroma because they're just like, this is like kind of more complicated. And
okay,
but it works the same way. You can pick colors with like, hue, like, the hue you want, how light you want it, how saturated or how chromatic you want it. It
okay,
works the same way, but like the math is just way, way, way closer to how the human eye perceives color. And so like if you work with HSL enough, you learn that like most of the numbers almost in HSL almost kind of seem like they produce the same color. And if you
okay,
look at if there's a way to graph it out, like HSL would just kind of be like really inconsistent, where it's good at certain waves of colors, but not others. And
okay,
then LCH is just more to the human eye, is just more even, where like HSL, you almost kind of end up picking the same colors over and over and over again.
okay, okay, yeah,
Um,
gotcha,
So LCH just helps you pick more diverse colors.
okay,
It helps even the spread to the human eye. And if you kind of dig into the math, it's like the newer the color space, the better we get at understanding the weird human eye,
okay,
and how the human brain perceives color. So it does get more complex, but it's like it's just like a newer version. It's
Yeah.
closer to how
Okay.
we actually perceive color, and so it's more perceptually accurate, and
Okay.
it's easier to work with. And yeah, underlying, I have copy pasted a bunch of stuff. I still don't really know like all the studies that lead to like, you end up just kind of working like, okay, there's like a 2.2 gamma and a 2.4 gamma, and then it's like there's a lot of like there's like 20 random magic numbers. I don't know how they got here. You know
Okay.
what? I don't care. I like the colors it makes. It makes my eyeballs happy. So I'm just going to
Yeah. Yeah.
stop questioning at a certain point.
Yeah. Well, I guess it comes back to vibe-driven development and design.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. Yeah, I haven't really like I've used HSL, but I haven't used LCH yet. But yeah, but again, like you said, it's like what are your interests too? Like you're obviously very interested. I mean, you're working on the design system at Figma. Like this kind of in your wheelhouse a bit too, digging into color and stuff as well. So but it is super fascinating and you know, I don't know. I haven't had to do I studied computer science at school and I did calculus and linear algebra and all that stuff, but I literally have never had to use any of that stuff since being a programmer, aside from like maybe calculating taxes and like, shopping cart totals. So,
Yeah.
it's just always amazing to me that like so much stuff in nature, including color, it's like a lot of it really is math, like so I don't know, just a little side note, I guess, but I don't know. People in the world are complex, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, like yeah, I mean, yeah, to if there's a theme, yeah, just kind of do follow your interests and follow what fascinates you because even like um like even like people ask me like why did I stop working on Astro when it was like getting more and more popular, and like
Yeah.
if I was being honest with myself, I found myself working on a lot of like back endy stuff, or like I had
Okay.
been just doing like a lot of like bundler work for years, and it was just more bundler work and like
Mhm.
more WebAssembly, and I was getting super burnt out. It's like I really want to like invest in design systems, and so
Yeah.
I just kind of like just followed the passions of like what gave me energy.
Yeah.
Because it's like I also don't want to, like we all go through times which like I'll admit I go through times I don't want to code. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to I just want to walk away from the computer. I want to go be out and touch grass and stuff.
Totally.
I go through those periods. But it's like I don't ever want to like resent like, oh, I actually the thing I found myself doing in my spare time, like, I love tinkering with computers and
Hmm.
dealing with like digital stuff. It's like I never want to turn that into like resentment or like hating doing it or just like hating waking up in the morning.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
but it's like, I just kind of like dug into design systems, and that led to like me working on like Figma, like building some of like Figma's tooling and stuff, which is like
Yeah.
kind of like a dream come true for me. So like,
Yeah,
like
that's super cool.
uh I mean, like I'm super lucky and fortunate. I'm not saying like there's a formula at all. But like anecdotally, just like following what interests you, like even if no one else is interested in it, or if there's like no buzz or marketing in the space, if you just find a problem that's just fascinating to you that you feel just needs to be solved, like chances are like you are onto something, and something will
Yeah.
come out of it if you chase it down.
Oh, totally. No, that's awesome. And probably a great place to wrap it up. I honestly, Drew, I could talk to you like all day, but I have stand up in 4 minutes. But
Oh shoot, yeah. Look at us.
no, it's all good. No,
We chatted for a while.
yeah, no, I loved it. It's awesome when it's funny. Like sometimes I have guests on, like if we're not doing live coding, they're like, I don't know if I'll have anything to talk about for like. I mean, I always tell them you don't have to talk an hour and a half. It's just that's what I book. But like more often than not, the guests like we always have a great conversation, and there's tons of stuff to talk about. And honestly, this stuff was all super fascinating. Love hearing about you getting into open source, like the early days of Snowpack and Astro, and again, it's super congrats on working at Figma now. That's I hear that place is taking off. It's
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
it's a real fun time.
Cool.
And Figma's always hiring, so check the careers page if you're interested in working with us.
Cool, cool. Awesome. I'm just gonna go ahead and drop a link if folks want to give you a follow there, Drew. And also, I'm just gonna drop the schedule. Next week, there's not gonna be any stream. I'm at Netlify Compose. I'm giving a talk about HTML forms, but I'll be back the week after. Gonna be hanging out with my old coworker Matt Kane from Netlify, who's now on the core team at Astro, and we're going to be digging into the new content layer system that he did a lot of work on. So we're going to go dive deep on that and build something fun out. So check that out. And thanks everybody for the chat. Always great to see you all here, and we'll see you in the next one. And Drew, if you don't mind just hanging on for 1 sec, and everybody else, we'll see you in a couple weeks.